for dozens of other discoveries which his money helped to finance. You can thank him for the fact that your children no longer die from spinal meningitis, a disease that used to kill 4 out of 5. And you can thank him for part of the inroads we have made on malaria and tuberculosis, on influenza and diphtheria, and many other diseases that still plague the world. And what about Rockefeller? When he gave his money away, did he gain peace of mind? Yes, he was contented at last. If the public thought of him after 1900 as brooding over the attacks on Standard Oil, said Alan Nevins, the public was much mistaken. Rockefeller was happy. He had changed so completely that he didn't worry at all. In fact, he refused even to lose one night's sleep when he was forced to accept the greatest defeat of his career. The defeat came when the corporation he had built, the huge Standard Oil, was ordered to pay the heaviest fine in history. According to the United States government, the Standard Oil was a monopoly, in direct violation of the antitrust laws. The battle raged for 5 years. The best legal brains in the land fought on interminably in what was up to then the longest court war in history. But Standard Oil lost. When Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis handed down his decision, lawyers for the defense feared that old John D. would take it very hard, but they didn't know how much he'd changed. That night, one of the lawyers got John D. on the phone. He discussed the decision as gently as he could and then said, with concern, "I hope you won't let this decision upset you, Mr. Rockefeller. I hope you'll be able to get a good night's sleep." And old John D.? Why, he cackled right back across the wire, "Don't worry, Mr. Johnson. I intend to get a night's sleep, and don't let it bother you either. Good night." And that from the man who had once taken to his bed because he had lost $150. Yes, it took a long time for John D. to conquer worry. He was dying at 53, but he lived to 98. I was committing slow suicide because I didn't know how to relax, by Paul Sampson. Up to 6 months ago, I was rushing through life in high gear. I was always tense, never relaxed. I arrived at home from work every night worried and exhausted from nervous fatigue. Why? Because no one ever said to me, "Paul, you're killing yourself. Why don't you slow down? Why don't you relax?" I would get up fast in the morning, eat fast, shave fast, dress fast, and drive to work as if I were afraid the steering wheel would fly out the window if I didn't have a death grip on it. I worked fast, hurried home, and at night I even tried to sleep fast. I was in such a state that I went to see a famous nerve specialist in Detroit. He told me to relax. He told me to think of relaxing all the time, to think about it when I was working, driving, eating, and trying to go to sleep. He told me that I was committing slow suicide because I didn't know how to relax. Ever since then, I've practiced relaxation. When I go to bed at night, I don't try to go to sleep until I've consciously relaxed my body and my breathing. And now I wake up in the morning rested, a big improvement, because I used to wake up in the morning tired and tense. I relax now when I eat and when I drive. To be sure, I'm alert when driving, but I drive with my mind now instead of my nerves. The most important place I relax is at my work. Several times a day I stop everything and take inventory of myself to see if I'm entirely relaxed. When the phone rings now, no longer do I grab it as though someone were trying to beat me to it, and when someone is talking to me, I am as relaxed as a sleeping baby. The result? Life is much more pleasant and enjoyable, and I'm completely free of nervous fatigue and nervous worry. A Real Miracle Happened to Me by Mrs. John Berger. Worry had completely defeated me. My mind was so confused and troubled that I could see no joy in living. My nerves were so strained that I could neither sleep at night nor relax by day. My 3 young children were widely separated, living with relatives. My husband, having recently returned from the armed service, was in another city trying to establish a law practice. I felt all the insecurities and uncertainties of the post-war readjustment period. I was threatening my husband's career, my children's natural endowment of a happy, normal home life, and I was also threatening my own life. My husband could find no housing, and the only solution was to build. Everything depended on my getting well. The more I realized this, and the harder I would try, the greater would be my fear of failure. Then I developed a fear of planning for any responsibility. I felt that I could no longer trust myself. I felt I was a complete failure. When all was darkest, and there seemed to be no help, my mother did something for me that I shall never forget or cease being grateful for. She shocked me into fighting back. She upbraided me for giving in and for losing control of my nerves and my mind. She challenged me to get up out of bed and fight for all I had. She said I was giving in to the situation, fearing it instead of facing it, running away from life instead of living it. So I did start fighting from that day on. That very weekend, I told my parents they could go home because I was going to take over, and I did what seemed impossible at the time. I was left alone to care for my 2 younger children. I slept well, I began to eat better, and my spirits began to improve. A week later, when they returned to visit me again, they found me singing at my ironing. I had a sense of well-being because I'd begun to fight a battle, and I was winning. I shall never forget this lesson. If a situation seems insurmountable, face it. Start fighting. Don't give in. From that time on, I forced myself to work and lost myself in my work. Finally, I gathered my children together and joined my husband in our new home. I resolved that I would become well enough to give my lovely family a strong, happy mother. I became engrossed with plans for our home, plans for my children, plans for my husband, plans for everything except for me. I became too busy to think of myself, and it was then that the real miracle happened. I grew stronger and stronger and could wake up with the joy of well-being, the joy of planning for the new day ahead, the joy of living. And although days of depression did creep in occasionally after that, especially when I was tired, I would tell myself not to think or try to reason with myself on those days, and gradually they became fewer and fewer, and finally disappeared. Now, a year later, I have a very happy, successful husband, a beautiful home that I can work in 16 hours a day, and 3 healthy, happy children, and for myself, peace of mind. How Benjamin Franklin Conquered Worry. A letter from Benjamin Franklin to Joseph Priestley. The latter, invited to become librarian for the Earl of Shelburne, asked Franklin's advice. Franklin, in his letter, states his method of solving problems without worrying. London, September 19, 1772. Dear Sir, in the affair of so much importance to you wherein you ask my advice, I cannot, for want of sufficient premise, advise you what to determine, but if you please I will tell you how. When these difficult cases occur, they are difficult chiefly because while we have them under consideration, all the reasons pro and con are not present to the mind at the same time, but sometimes one set present themselves, and at other times another, the first being out of sight. Hence the various purposes or inclinations that alternately prevail, and the uncertainty that perplexes us. To get over this, my way is to divide half a sheet of paper by a line into 2 columns, writing over the one pro and over the other con. Then, during 3 or 4 days' consideration, I put down under the different heads short hints of the different motives that at different times occur to me, for or against the measure. When I have thus got them all together in one view, I endeavor to estimate their respective weights, and where I find 2, one on each side, that seem equal, I strike them both out. If I find a reason pro equal to some 2 reasons con, I can strike out the 3. If I judge some 2 reasons con equal to some 3 reasons pro, I strike out the 5, and thus proceeding I find at length where the balance lies, and if after a day or 2 of further consideration nothing new that is of importance occurs on either side, I come to a determination accordingly. And though the weight of reasons cannot be taken with the precision of algebraic quantities, yet when each is thus considered separately and comparatively, and the whole lies before me, I think I can judge better, and am less likely to make a rash step, and, in fact, I have found great advantage from this kind of equation in what may be called moral or prudential algebra. Wishing sincerely that you may determine for the best, I am ever, my dear friend, yours most affectionately, Ben Franklin. I was so worried I didn't eat a bite of solid food for 18 days, by Catherine Holcomb Farmer. 3 months ago, I was so worried that I didn't sleep for 4 days and nights, and did not eat a bite of solid food for 18 days. Even the smell of food made me violently sick. I cannot find words to describe the mental anguish I endured. I wonder whether hell has any worse tortures than what I went through. I felt as if I would go insane or die. I knew that I couldn't possibly continue living as I was. The turning point of my life was the day I was given an advanced copy of this book. During the last 3 months, I have practically lived with this book, studying every page, desperately trying to find a new way of life. The change that has occurred in my mental outlook and emotional stability is almost unbelievable. I am now able to endure the battles of each passing day. I now realize that in the past I was being driven half-mad, not by today's problems, but by the bitterness and anxiety over something that had happened yesterday, or that I feared might happen tomorrow. But now, when I find myself starting to worry about anything, I immediately stop and start to apply some of the principles I learned from studying this book. If I am tempted to tense up over something that must be done today, I get busy and do it immediately and get it off my mind. When I'm faced with the kind of problems that used to drive me half crazy, I now calmly set about trying to apply the 3 steps outlined in Chapter 2, Part 1. First, I ask myself, what is the worst that can possibly happen? Second, I try to accept it mentally. Third, I concentrate on the problem and see how I can improve the worst, which I'm already willing to accept if I have to. When I find myself worrying about a thing I cannot change and do not want to accept, I stop myself short and repeat this little prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Since reading this book, I'm really experiencing a new and glorious way of life. I am no longer destroying my health and happiness by anxiety. I can sleep 9 hours a night now. I enjoy my food. A veil has been lifted from me. A door has been opened. I can now see and enjoy the beauty of the world which surrounds me. I thank God for life now and for the privilege of living in such a wonderful world. May I suggest that you also read this book over. Keep it by your bed. Underscore the parts that apply to your problems. Study it. Use it. For this is not a reading book in the ordinary sense. It is written as a guidebook to a new way of life.